Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Well Teacher Festival. My name is Jamie Tom. I'm a teacher and the host of the Well Teacher podcast. I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted that today we have a talk from Myatt. I was absolutely delighted when Mary agreed to record something for us because I just think she's absolutely wonderful. I think her writing has had a massive influence on me in terms of the way I function in the school environment and in terms of the way that I kind of keep positive and keep purpose at the core of what I do in a school. Okay, so she's the author of 3 absolutely terrific books on education. Her first book is High Challenge No Threat. Her second is Hope for Schools. And her third is a fantastic overview of the curriculum, which is called The Curriculum. And she, very excitedly, she has a new book coming out on the 15th of September, which looks absolutely brilliant. Basically, she has been obviously reading and thinking lots about how we spend our time as a profession. And a lot of what she's written is influenced by this brilliant book, which is Essentialism by Greg McKeown, which I really would strongly recommend as well. Okay, so that book is called Back on Track, and that is out on the 15th of September. That's published by John Catt. So in this talk today, Mary has given a really fascinating 30-minute overview on how we can best thrive and succeed in the year ahead. And it literally takes us on a journey through everything, through how we can improve our sleep, how we can improve our capacity to work together collaboratively and effectively. And alongside that, the part I found particularly fascinating was this concept of the disciplined pursuit of less. So instead of this kind of manic attempt to manage everything, what Mary's new book is exploring is about this notion of essentialism. What can we really invest more time in to make us more effective in what we do for young people? And that really is about what's going to impact on children's learning more. So it's a great talk. It's about getting rid of the fluff and getting rid of the core of what is going to improve our health and our work for young people. So Mary talks about all kinds of stuff, everything from the importance of stories to recognizing and connecting with that notion of purpose I mentioned a moment ago. And also another line I just have to get in before I let Mary take over is this notion that we are humans first and professionals second. And I think that's such a vital thing to hold on to as we start a new academic year. So a huge thank you to Mary for recording something for the festival, and I hope that you find it as nurturing, as useful, and as inspiring as I found it. Okay, thank you.
Hello there. I'm Mary Myatt, and I'm delighted to be sharing some thoughts with you for the Well Teacher Festival. So just a bit about me and my background. I'm originally trained as a religious education teacher. I then joined the local authority in Suffolk. Then I left the local authority, and since 2011 I've been working as thinker and writer about migration, and some of that is in inspecting schools, some of it is involved being in schools, improve outcomes for lots of young people. So really important that we focus on what it means to be a well teacher, and sitting underneath that is the notion of well-being. And so I hope that you find this session helpful. So there are a number of elements that I think it's quite helpful to consider when we're thinking about well teacher and well-being. And I've identified 3 elements that I think it might be quite helpful to clarify my thoughts around this topic. So the first one then is that I think it's really important that we put our masks on first. So what that means is, as we all know from if we've been on a plane, less likely to have happened recently, but we've all had that very strong message that if there's an emergency on an airplane, that we put our masks on ourselves first before putting them on any child or any youngster who might not be able to do them for themselves. The reason for that is it's counterintuitive, because you want to protect and in educational settings, do everything you can for the young people that we work with. But, you know, in the aeroplane example, if we don't make ourselves secure first, then we can't help anyone else. And so there's some important stuff sitting behind this. And one of those is that we must take our own well-being seriously. So what does that mean then in practice? Well, the first thing that it means is that we have to take self-care really seriously. This is not about being self-indulgent. This is about an honest validation of ourselves as human beings first and professionals second. Number one in that list of priorities that I think we ought to be including in this is sleep. As far as I'm concerned, the most important thing for me as a teacher or any work that I do is that I'm the best possible version of myself in any circumstance, whether it's in the classroom or anywhere else. And I can only do that if I've had sufficient sleep. Now, there will be a number of us who, with young children, for whom the sleep might be interrupted. And there isn't much we can do about that. But if we are not having our sleep interrupted, I think we do need to take our sleep really seriously. And that means going to bed a bit earlier. Now, it might sound trite, but in fact, there is growing evidence we simply cannot function properly. We need sufficient rest in order to be able to do our work properly. So this is not self-indulgent, this is a priority. And I do believe we can do it. It's very easy to get caught up in television, on social media, and I think we need to give ourselves alarms that goes off at least 30 minutes before we then head to bed. The second thing is we need to eat properly. Healthy things in our diets makes a big difference to our energy levels. And the third thing in terms of masks on first is making sure that we take time out to do some form of exercise. It doesn't need to be much, but just getting fresh air into our lungs is incredibly important. So it's not about preparing to run marathons, great as they are, and plenty of colleagues will be doing that, but it's about just getting out into the fresh air, moving a bit, supports this notion of putting our masks on first. I'm just going to say at this point that one of the most helpful pieces of advice I had as a newly qualified teacher before I started was someone said to me, what's really important is that you go home at least one day a week. I think it's reasonable to say one day a week minimum, within 10 minutes of the pupils or students having left the building. It's obviously in the day when there aren't any other meetings. That sometimes means not doing some of the stuff that one might have planned. But what I found, I took that advice on board, it just kept me sane. And that means leaving very shortly after the pupils or students, not taking any work home. This provides a real sense of balance and sanity to what we're doing. The difficult got to live with that, because one of the things about teaching, I mean, life in general, but teaching is particularly prone to this, is there's always something else to do. So we have to breathe into the fact and lean into the fact that we're not going to be able to do everything. So if that's the case, why not take one day when we leave as soon as possible after the children? Really, really important. It makes such a difference. Okay, so that's my first point. The second point is, if we focus on our priorities, it means becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable notion of trade-offs. So one of the big threads of my work is that we need to be focusing on the disciplined pursuit of fewer things in greater, the disciplined pursuit of less. So this is Greg McCann's work in my latest book on Back on Track. But given that we can't do everything, we've got to be absolutely brutal about saying we're going to do things, but we're going to make sure that they are the right things. So aligned to this is, so Pareto was working in Switzerland, although he was originally Italian, and he was doing some work in the late 19th century as a sociologist on the proportion of land that was owned by the people in England. And what he found was that 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the population. So that idea of 80-20 has subsequently been picked up in lots of leadership and management theory. And I think it's got applications in the educational sector as well, because it shows is not roughly 80-20. But the main message is that 80% of our outcomes come from 20% of our input. So if we're going to be wise about well teachers and 20% of things that have the greatest impact on our work. And I think that means we've got to be brutal about saying no to some things. So if we're going to have a few priorities, it means becoming comfortable with the fact that there will be trade-offs. So we don't like trade-offs because it means we're not going to do some things, and we know that we want to do them. We know that they might need to be done, but they're going to have to be sacrificed to do the things that are going to have the greatest impact. And so it takes a kind of discipline, it takes courage, but if we don't take this notion of the disciplined pursuit of less and recognize psychological discomfort, that the fact if we prioritize a few things, because we have too many priorities, otherwise they're not priorities, things we're not going to do. So there are going to be trade-offs. But when we do that, we then arrive at a place where we're able to say, well, what is the greatest value for our work? So generally, what has been established through sociological work, the greatest value to our work in schools is a high quality curriculum for all our pupils. And so the argument that I'm making is that the 20% of investment needs to go into that part of our work to get 80% of the outcome. And these are not accurate figures, but we know that curriculum makes sense to our children. What I'm arguing, in whatever country we're in, that's what we focus on. So what are some of the trade-offs that there might be then in order to get to that place of focusing on the curriculum? So one of them is going to be most of our marking that we chop most more, I would say about 90% cooking, but it is not adding value. There's evidence that in a child's book improve. What does make a difference, high quality content, what they're learning in the moment, but actually writing in of itself, most does not make a difference. Most of the things given to children is either too wood, too imprecise, and it's giving the most of the feedback that's given to children isn't precise enough, it's not moving them on sufficiently. There are a lot of other procedures in schools adding value to low. We know that most of the numbers and the data that is collected doesn't really tell us anything about what a child can really by talking to them, etc. So it's about stripping away anything that is not making a difference to children's learning. And to be honest, this does take bravery. It's not, doesn't just land, ready-made. So if we're going to take well-being seriously, we've got to be brave about it as well. So I'm not saying this is easy to say that it is important. And then we can get to that place of adding greatest value. One of the things that it's helpful to plug into here are the findings from cognitive science in terms of what we know about learning, what about securing children's knowing deep level in their long-term memory. So two strands that I think are really powerful is the power of stories. So there's a lot of evidence that our brain thinking about having the greatest impact with the smallest amount of effort from us as teachers. Then we identify great stories within our topics, within our units, and we convey those to our children. And aligned to the stories is a really important piece of work which came out from Sussex University in being allowed to pupils and students above their pay grade. So what this meant was that, the findings from this is that children's reading ages went up significantly during the trial, and they went up, they doubled, the reading ages of the children doubled for the most disadvantaged groups. Now, if we take on board this kind of research, this is both robust but light touch for me as a teacher to find a great story to underpin any unit that I'm teaching with my children. And we use these instead of low-grade worksheets and differentiating the power of 10. It's not needed when we've got a great resource. The second thing that's come out of the cognitive science is that tests, the right sort of tests, are really good for children's learning, because the trying to retrieve something from the memory actually strengthens our memory of that. So low stakes testing, which can be set up quite quickly, and there's plenty on the internet as well, are going to add value to children's learning. So this part of the thread that I'm offering as a suggestion is that we do fewer things in greater depth, that we find the things like powerful, rich materials based in the authentic material, and then testing children in a low stakes way. This can actually be good for us, good for our children, and actually far less in terms of preparation. We need to get away from this idea that we need to be differentiating for every child in every class. Totally unnecessary. We pitch things to the top, primarily through a rich text, and we unpack it through talk. This is what the researchers say. So this starts becoming joyful in terms of our lesson preparation, which feeds into well-being, as opposed to a drudge. We don't want to do drudge. So I'm going to refer now to Rosabeth Moss-Kanter's work, and she talks about the 6 keys to positive success. So Rosabeth Moss-Kanter is a very well respected, and she spent her life's work identifying those companies which do well, very well, by their stakeholders. They're very successful in terms of profit. They do very well by their employees, and they do very well in their community. So the richness of stakeholderdom has been a big thread of her work. And she has distilled 6 keys that she's identified that underpin the ways of working for lots of these organizations. So what I find intriguing about Rosabeth Moss-Kanter's work is that it's underpinned by business, it's underpinned by profitability, but it's also underpinned by ethics, by adding. It's also underpinned by ethics, by adding value. It's founded in an ethical framework, because funnily enough, when we abide by ethical principles, which by the way does not mean we get everything right all the time, but if we're trying to live through ethical principles, we find not only do we feel and live more fully, but our work is better. And so this applies not just in business, but also in education. So what I've noticed is that those schools that only pursue the results, and I know this is very sensitive across lots of countries, the results that are coming out this summer, and so there's big stuff to be unpacked by that. But when we're not in lockdown scenarios, what I've noticed is those schools that only pursue the results, they're not happy places to be. Those results are not sustained long term. So I think we can take some of the principles from wider leadership, like Rosabeth Moss-Kanter's, and just say, might these have implications for us? So I've chosen these to support this session on well teaching, because I think they apply in this context as well. So there are 6 keys, and the first is this, that we show up. So this is about making sure that we not just physically clock in when and lockdown, but that we bring our complete selves to our work. When we do this, the value is not just for the people we're working with, whether it's colleagues or pupils in our classrooms, it's also a really rich way of working for ourselves. It's a very affirming place to be. So that's number 1. The second one is to speak up. We all have the right to have our voices heard. We've all got something interesting to say and share with our colleagues. So it's about not suppressing those ideas because we think other people won't find them useful or helpful. Being prepared to speak up is really important for organizations if they want to thrive. And when I talk about organizations, they can be large or small, they can be within, for instance, schools or colleges, within departments, whatever, but making sure that we speak up and that we provide an opportunity for others to speak up. And the corollary to that is that we also know when to shut up, because we don't want to hog, no one should hog the floor. But anyway, second one is speak up. Third one is to look up. And this is important because we need to remind ourselves of why we're doing this work, wherever we are, whether we're in education or anything else. What is the big reason why we're doing the work beyond some financial reward, which we all need in order to put food on the table and a roof over our heads? But it's important to look beyond that and say, well, why am I in education? why are we in education? Because when we do that, we start generating an amazing spirit of purpose and of energy to do the right things that make the greatest difference. The next thing is to team up. So there is a lot of evidence that by and large, when we work together, and particularly on the work that we're doing within schools, particularly around the curriculum, that when we work with other people, the outcomes are stronger. There will be times when we need to be working on our own. There'll be times when we need to be reading quietly, making notes, etc., and reflecting and thinking. But for the most part, the outcomes are much stronger. And that's particularly important when we're planning the curriculum, when we're planning lessons. I don't think anyone should be doing this on their own, that they should be collaborating with colleagues. And if we're in a small setting, we find ways of doing that through virtual meetings. And one thing as lockdown has taught us is that we've all worked out how 24 hours to putting provision online. You know, dreadful as the circumstances were, we've got to say, well, goodness, how much we've learned, how much more flexible can we be? And one of the consequences of lockdown has been the extent that there's been much greater degree of collaboration. And so this notion of teaming up means it's less burdensome, but it is also higher outcome. Then, so if we're involved in something that is worthwhile, quite important, there is going to come a point, it's going to get sticky. We're going to hit some barbed wire. We're going to hit a barrier. So the question we need to ask ourselves is this worthwhile? If it's worthwhile, we need to find a way to go around that barbed wire or cut through it. We don't do it straight, and rebuilding our resources, rebuilding our resilience, just taking a bit of a breather. But if something is worthwhile, it means we don't give up. And Rosabeth Moss-Cantor's got a great way of saying, she says, in the middle of doing something, it never feels successful. And I think we can all relate to that. So this is about being prepared to give ourselves a bit of a breather. Because to be honest, in education, we're not working in medicine. This is not life or death. If something is delayed a bit, because we need that delay, nobody's going to die. Because we get so caught up in we've got to get this finished. Actually, let's just inject into that. And actually feeds into meditation, and that is another whole area which, funnily enough, is being taken very, very seriously by the leadership and business community. So if they do it because it makes a difference, I think that's not the main focus of my set, but I think it's well worth looking at some of the great apps that are out there, feeding through a lot of what we face every day, joy in the moment. So never giving up. And then the final is to lift others up. I think it's one of the greatest gifts we can give to another human being is to encourage them. And we all need encouragement. And so this isn't just to our peers, it isn't just to our pupils, it's also to those who lead us. We all need it wherever we are in the system. And for me, this is the most important one. And I'm sure we can all think of one person who has just said something that has made all the difference at a moment when we needed it. They didn't know necessarily that we needed it. And funny enough, it's quite often a child, quite often it's one of the rogues. You know, to be open to that appreciation of others and then to give it to others as well. So there's two prongs to this. It's lifting others up and it's being open to receiving it as well. And linked to that is sometimes if people pay us compliments or say, well done, that we don't push that away through modesty. Because what someone is doing then is they're offering us a gift and saying, you know, that was a really great piece of work, or I appreciate it when you did that. And so to accept it as a gift and say, well, thank you very much, that makes a difference. It feels uncomfortable to begin with, but actually then starts getting more comfortable. So when we work in this way, we resonate more, we are more alive, we don't sweat the small stuff. There's a huge amount sitting behind this. I'm just giving the headlines. But in terms of the details of getting shot of the things that we really don't need to be working on, who are we doing a lot of this work for, and living up to our true values, I think is an important part of well-being and the Well Teacher session. So underpinning this is that we remind ourselves that we're human beings first, that we are professionals second, that the young people we work with, they're human beings first and they're learners second. And when we've got that in place, we can really fly. It doesn't mean things are going to be perfect, but it means that we kind of ride a wave of just thinking this will work out over time. This is good in this moment, because we have to face up to the fact that we're all doing the best we possibly can do. We cannot go back in time. We can't reclaim the months that have gone. We just have to accept they've gone. But in this moment of reclaiming wellness and well-being and well-teaching, that we remind ourselves that we're human beings first, we're professionals second. So if you'd like more resources about some of the things I've talked about, I've written quite a lot about this in blogs on marymyatt.com, and my latest book, Back on Track, is out September 15th, 2020, if you wanted to take this any further. I also have on my website quite a few free resources, including videos to support just general things that make the most difference to most children in our classrooms that don't involve overwork. It's about doing this stuff in the moment. So I hope that some of those thoughts for the Well Teacher Festival are helpful, and I wish you all the best. I'm Mary Myatt. Best of luck.